Welcome back to another conversation with Carl. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Today I'm talking to Dr. Casey Jordan. She is a criminologist, behavioral analyst, professor, and also an attorney. She is also the anchor of Criminal Appeal with Dr. Casey Jordan, a new podcast. When police need help, they turn to Casey. Today, we turn to her. Welcome, Dr. Casey Jordan, to the conversation.
Carl, it's so good to be with you. I've known you for so many years, since we used to cover like Casey Anthony back in the day on the morning shows.
I know. I've known you for, I think, close to 20 years.
It's amazing. Yep.
Time goes fast. So let me ask you, tell me about what are you doing now, your podcast?
Well, I mean, I love the introduction because people very often are like, I mean, how many hats can a woman wear? And I don't know whether it's a blessing or an affliction, but I like doing a lot of things at all times. So yeah, I am always a criminologist and a professor at Western Connecticut State University. I've been there for 38 years this year, which is kind of crazy. And, you know, I love teaching, but I'm always got my fingers in all the pies. So in the last 3 or 4 months, I went ahead and started my own podcast. It looks like we all have podcast fever. So that if I end up retiring from teaching, I always have something to keep me busy. So I still do a lot of commentary on television as crimes, breaking news crimes. I love that. You know, I spent about 20 years kind of off and on as a commentator for CNN and HLN, but those contracts have all lapsed, and this gives me time to delve into my own podcast, Criminal Appeal. And the difference between my podcast and all the other true crime podcasts is that I am talking about cases that I have worked firsthand and that I know personally. Cases I've worked for the police, as an investigative profiler, sometimes as a defense attorney. I'm covering some cases I've defended, as long as I don't violate attorney-client privilege. And if we run out of those, I'll start covering cases that I've worked in the media, which is how I met you, Carl.
Yes. We met on Casey Anthony.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yes. So tell me, like, how did you get started in criminology? How did you decide one day I'm going to be a criminologist?
You know, I get that question all the time. And here's what I want people to know. Life is a highway, right? And there are going to be a lot of detours. I started out wanting to be a diplomat, just like in the hit series, Diplomat. I was a poli-sci major undergrad. I was a specialist in Middle East studies. And in the process of that, I ended up I ended up becoming really interested in not just terrorism, because I was working at that time for the Libyan Permanent Mission to the United Nations. Yes, in 1985, my first job out of college, that's what I did. And this was a very tenuous time. You know, the U.S. and Libya were practically at war, you know, and the Libyans were accused of the Lockerbie and the Frankfurt bombing. If you got to be like over 60 to remember these things. Carl, I just became absolutely fascinated with the psychology of terror. And I switched gears and decided to go to school for criminology and criminal justice to learn more about violence studies. And I went to John Jay College and got my master's and my PhD there, and then taught there for 10 years. And in that process of wanting to study the psychology of violence for the reason of terrorism, I kind of lost interest in terrorism and became far more interested in interpersonal violence. And this was at the exact same time that like Silence of the Lambs came out. And, you know, Thomas Harris was writing Red Dragon and Hannibal. So I didn't even know that I was kind of like, I was new to this whole genre. And I got in just before it exploded with like all of the attention to CSI and Criminal Minds. Before true crime became like huge, I was already in it. So working at John Jay, the TV stations would call us because John Jay and all the TV studios were right next to each other around 59th, 60th on the west side of Manhattan. I would go around and just give free commentary. To me, it was just like teaching a class, but you're just doing it for a camera. And I liked it and I enjoyed it. So even though I've always been a criminologist, I've always loved covering breaking news on crime. And oh yeah, we forgot about becoming a lawyer. I went back to college. I went back to law school in my 30s and became an attorney as well, and did a lot of trial work defending in criminal defense, high stakes trials, mostly people with mental health issues that I believe deserved a good offense.
Is the mind of a terrorist and the mind of a criminal, are they similar?
Well,
Or they're different missions?
it's a mission thing. So, you know, Carl, I'm sure you've heard the saying, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And it just kind of comes down to our philosophical approach and political beliefs in what we believe in. But the people who commit terrorism My definition of terrorism, absolutely believe in the moment that what they're doing is a higher calling and that it is important, even if it means giving their lives. I was always interested in the psychology of the suicide bomber, somebody who was willing to give their life for a greater cause. And whether that happens through indoctrination from an organization or self brainwashing, the lone wolves
Yeah.
who get online and indoctrinate themselves by going into chat rooms and, be basically brainwashed and converted to a certain belief system. I'm interested in the process by which that happens. And, our belief system, our psychology, I mean, the whole cost benefit analysis of I think I'm going to commit this crime because it's going to pay off, the illogic of calculating the risk versus the benefit of the crime versus the chances of getting caught. All of that has always fascinated me. So it's a lot of forensic psychology as well, whether it's terrorism, serial killing, mass murder, or just having an argument with your spouse, right? There's a lot of psychology.
But crime has changed today, I would say, because of cameras, because of cell phones, because they know where you are at all times. Like everybody knows where you are.
How about just because of the internet and
Mhm.
television? Okay, so the surveilling society has changed behavior, goes without saying. But so has this whole idea of people watching TV, and they love this stuff. I mean, there are people who just are ID addicts and watching Oxygen, know every episode of Criminal Minds and CSI. And even though they know a lot of it's fake, they learn a lot from watching these shows. So we used to always start the question with a murder. Is the killer organized or disorganized? The most baseline question, did they use a weapon of opportunity that they found at the crime scene, or did they bring a kill kit with them? Now, no, really,
Yeah,
now there's
no, that's
almost
a
no such thing as a disorganized criminal. They
yeah,
all know what DNA is. They all
yeah.
know what DNA is. They all know how to plant contraindicators, red herrings. They stage and pose things, not because it's their true psychological nature, but to throw off investigators. So
Yeah.
investigating and solving these crimes is harder than ever because human behavior has been so modified by TV, entertainment, and just availability of information by searching the
When
internet has changed criminal behavior drastically in the last 20 or 25 years since I got my PhD.
when I was a producer at Court TV and they would put on the DNA evidence, it would take 2, 3 days,
Yeah.
and it would be tedious, it would be boring. Today, it must be 15 minutes. Does the DNA match? We believe it.
The technology has just grown leaps and bounds. And of course, DNA has always been here, but the DNA technology was
Thanks.
pretty brand new 30, 35 years ago. Now, when I've done criminal defense work, I worry because the juries think it's a magic bullet. They're like, unless you have DNA, we're not going to convict. And if you do have
Right.
DNA, we will convict. And there's so much more to DNA because, of course, it's only as good as the humans who process it. And human error can compromise DNA evidence all the time. Now, I'm no DNA expert, but I do worry about our juries a lot, putting an over-reliance on DNA and physical forensics instead of circumstantial evidence and other direct evidence. I mean,
Well,
eyewitness
yeah.
testimony these days, if you don't have it on camera, no one's going to believe it.
All trials are basically circumstantial. Very few are like, I saw him do it. You
Correct.
know,
But now everybody wants direct evidence. They want
they
to
want
see
see.
a video recording of it. They want to see DNA left in the crime scene. If there's a logical reason why the DNA might have been tampered with or inconclusive, they don't care. They just are like, where's the DNA?
Yeah.
It's concerning, actually, because we have too many armchair criminologists out there. And there's nothing wrong with being an armchair detective and learning a lot by watching TV. But it's harder and harder to get people who can follow the rule of law, whose processing of the facts is not tainted by their internet searches and their addiction to true crime on television.
When I covered a trial, and I remember this in Michigan a long time ago, the judge said it's very hard to make sure these jurors don't go home at night. They don't go to the crime scene. Today, you Google it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how judges combat that, and I don't know how prosecutors and defense attorneys are combating that. If you're on your computer at night and you're swiping, it could pop up into your feed.
Absolutely. Everyone is going to go home and promise not to. We used to say, read the newspapers. I promise not to look at the newspapers, but then nobody's even got a paper in their hand
Yeah.
anymore. They're all on their phones. You can't ban a jury from, I mean, having their phones at night to talk to their family and stuff. So the bottom line is there's a lot of good faith in juries that I'm not sure is actually substantiated
Yeah.
because it's almost, I don't mean to shift gears, but as a
Yeah.
professor, all we do is go, all the kids cheat now. They all use AI to write their papers.
Yeah.
And we are powerless. When it's plagiary, you can compare it against something. But
Yeah.
when it's just using AI and cheating that way, we've just kind of given up the ghost. And I kind of feel like that's how judges are now with juries. They are not at all convinced that they can have a good, clean jury these days. It's why I'm a fan of professional juries, actually. I think they should be lay people, but I think that they should be far better vetted and far better trained and committed to suspending any bias and actually working at neutrality, people who have made a commitment to that, because I'm very concerned about stealth jurors, especially because I think we might have a trial with Luigi this year or next,
Yeah.
and I'm very concerned about stealth juries for that and a whole number of cases that are coming up.
Well, if we talk about the Luigi trial, people are going to think to themselves, everyone's had a healthcare issue and everyone's had a fight with the insurance company. And everyone at some time has gotten very angry at their insurance company, not at their doctors, at their insurance company.
Yeah. I
And
don't know how we're
yeah,
going to get a proper jury for that case. I really
yeah.
don't. And a change of venue won't matter. You'd have to be living under a rock to not know about Luigi. And by the way, we're going to cover him in an upcoming podcast that I've got coming out next month. And of course, I'm Switzerland, right? And I know that a lot of people think Luigi is like an avatar folk hero. But let's be
We
very
should
clear. You can't go around murdering
kill him.
anybody just
Yes.
to make a political statement.
Correct.
So
Correct. And you
I
can't
will
do
be
that.
very interested because, I mean, when Saturday Night Live tries to make a joke during Weekend Update about Luigi and the crowd goes into a roar of applause just hearing the name Luigi,
Yeah.
I mean, that's more indicative
Yeah.
to me than a Quinnipiac poll. I'm really worried that you're going to get somebody who gets on that jury to nullify the finding. In other words, to make sure he's found not guilty regardless of the rule of law and regardless of the evidence.
Yeah.
And this is the world we now live in. I mean, this is really the dark side of technology and access to information. Sometimes the downside outweighs the good side.
So let's move on to a case that's in the news right now.
Yep.
Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy Guthrie,
Yeah.
has disappeared. What do you think police are doing right now? Or like, if they called you, what would you say we need to do?
Well, they're not going to call me. First of all, I need to point out that
Yeah.
I very often, because this is my job, it's what we
Yeah.
do, it's what detectives and investigators do. We speculate. You have to
Yeah.
look at all of the scenarios, trying to figure out which one is the most likely, and then pursue all of these different scenarios. I always get like lambasted for, she's just speculating. I'm like, yes, that's what I do. All right, but it's based on actual knowledge and having worked thousands of cases. So what are they doing right now? I would say, okay, you're going to figure out a few different things. Who had access to the house? Who would have the confidence to break into this house? Who would, so opportunity is huge. I'm sure that over the years, Nancy Guthrie has had dozens, maybe hundreds of service providers, pool cleaners, home cleaners, landscapers. I mean, it's just kind of like one of those things like how many people have been in the house and know who she is and know that her daughter is a person, a public figure who clearly has a lot of money, opportunity. And then the next question I would be asking is who would want to hurt? Probably not Nancy. Who would want to hurt an 84-year-old lady who's so immobile? Probably nobody. But who would maybe have a beef with her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, who is, as we know, the Today Show anchor for many, many years, and who, unbeknownst to herself, may have said something sometime, could be years ago, that actually offended somebody, or they latched onto her, or they tried to be her friend and she didn't give them the time of day. They sent her a dozen fan mails and she didn't respond. I mean, these are things that public figures have to think about all the time. There could be somebody out there lurking back there who's obsessed with Savannah and feels rebuffed or has a beef with something she said, who has, not for the money, but for the vendetta, kidnapped her mother to hurt Savannah. And then the offshoot of that is, did they just take her money? And is this ransom driven? Is this profit driven? Are they looking for a payout? So those are the things that police are going to be thinking about right now as they go through all these, the list of any people who may have a grudge against Savannah, as well as the list of everybody who might have the motive, the opportunity, and the ability to kidnap an 85-year-old lady. And it's not going to be a hard kidnapping, but given the fact that we have no footprints, no tire tracks, no digital evidence, I mean, apparently no camera footage, this is a sophisticated operation, whether it's one person, two, or a group. They know what they're doing. So this was not an impulsive, there's nothing to indicate it was a random, impulsive, unhinged intruder who just happened to have picked Savannah Guthrie's mother. I'm
But
very sure this was targeted. Yeah.
it could also be something to do with one of her siblings. It doesn't just have to be about Savannah.
Doesn't have to
It
be
could,
Savannah,
yes,
but if it
yes,
is profit driven, I'm pretty sure she's the one with the money.
money.
I could
Yes,
be wrong, but
yes,
I'm pretty sure she gets a
yeah,
nice hefty paycheck from the Today
yeah,
Show. And even though she's as authentic as they come, if you're going to
yeah,
kidnap somebody for profit, you
yeah.
do it because you know Savannah Guthrie has money in the bank.
What do you make about these ransom notes that have shown up at TMZ and another local station in
Until the police, here's the number one reason I think they're all hoaxes
okay,
because we know about them.
yeah,
If they had an actual communication demanding ransom that gave them enough specificity and proof of life of Nancy, we wouldn't know about it. All right. They would
yeah,
be absolutely working with family on next steps. Nobody ever wants to negotiate with kidnappers because if you give them what they want, it's open season on all rich people and their families, right? So if that exists, we don't know about it, nor should we know about it. But if there's leakage, and I mean, if you're going to send a ransom note by email to a news station or TMZ, I keep hearing conflicting reports. All they did in the communication was apparently say they could describe the inside of her home and also what she was wearing. Okay, Carl, many people know what the inside of the home looks like because they were either service providers or they actually saw Savannah talking to her mother in her mother's home on the Today Show. Okay. What was she wearing when she was abducted? Nobody knows. So that's useless information because as we know, family member dropped her off after having dinner at around 9:30 or 10 on Saturday night. And then we don't know if she changed into pajamas or a nightgown. Was it pink? Did it have flowers? Nobody knows what she was wearing when she was abducted. So that's useless information. I would say that if we get very specific information, super specific, about, I don't know, a birthmark or a mole that nobody would know about, an inscription on the inside of a ring she is wearing, something so specific, then you can take it seriously. But right now, I'm just hearing a lot of chatter that I think is really horrible humans,
yeah.
exploiting a terrible situation and doing these hoaxes, thinking they're going to get crypto. I don't think any of them are legit. I really don't.
And what do police do to make sure that they are legit? Like, if you
Well,
got this, like, what would the first thing that you would be doing?
you've got to, first of all, if you're sending it by email, they're going to find you. Okay. I don't care
Okay,
how many VPNs you can switch to. There are
okay,
ways to work around VPNs and they're going to figure out where that email originated from. All right. We're not talking about, we're talking about the most sophisticated digital forensics people in
okay.
the United States, FBI. Are working on this right now. So they're going to figure out where that email came from. And I will answer your question, but
No,
literally
no,
cutting out
yeah,
your
this is good.
ransom note from magazine words and pasting it on construction paper with latex gloves is probably better than sending an email. But what are they doing? They're going to establish communication. Let's just keep emailing. Yeah, stay on the line.
Yeah,
Stay on the line. Keep emailing me because eventually your VPN, you're going to forget your VPN or it's going to lapse and we're going to figure out where you are. They're going to develop a dialogue, whether it's by email or whether they can get through to them by phone, and ask them very specific questions. Keep them on the line, but ask them questions which essentially indicate proof of life, proof that they have Nancy, proof that she's alive. All right. And if you don't get those things, you don't continue the conversation because you know that
yeah.
it's not legitimate. You know these people don't really have Nancy.
So we're talking about emails. We get scams all the time. They can't figure out where that's coming from. If I get an email asking me for, what's it, the Nigerian prince has money in a bank account for me, they can't figure out how to stop that. Or
Cyber forensics, cyber security is not my wheelhouse, but
okay,
let me
okay,
just
got
say
it.
people who are so much smarter than me, but I mean, I work
Yeah,
with these professors.
yeah,
This is this is a skill set that I can't even fathom, and I
okay,
don't even think the average computer scientist can fathom it.
okay.
I do think that we have very top secret ways of zoning in on that.
What are the other cases that you're following right now?
Well, honestly, we've had a month of being a little bit obsessed with the Ohio dentist and his wife, Spencer and Monique Tepe. As you know, this was, slain in their home, no signs of forced entry. And now we have her ex-husband under arrest. And we just got news a few days ago that there is proof that he was in her house 3 weeks before on December 6th. And this all happened, of course, at the end of December. Now, that just a lot of stalking and domestic homicide is in my wheelhouse. So I'm following that case very closely, mostly because I don't think we pay enough attention to domestic victims. We're all just like, well, of course it's the ex-husband. Okay, but is there any way that she could have been safe from this man who had said he was going to kill her? So the whole domestic violence aspect is part of criminology that always, because my heart is so with the victims, it's the part of criminology that really I want to focus on. And we do it a lot in the podcast. One of the cases, sorry, I'm going to go to the
Yeah.
podcast again, that I covered, and we just released it back in November. It was a case that happened a few years ago in Connecticut, and this was the wife of a UConn professor who killed her husband and then kept him in the basement for 7 months before he was discovered. This was all the way back in 2018 that he was discovered. And this was a case that I worked as an attorney, right? And was a consultant for her defense attorneys to figure out if the battered spouse syndrome should apply in this particular case when it came to the defense. So this is why domestic violence is on my mind, because Carl,
Yeah.
she was about to be sentenced 2024, not even 2 years ago, after 6 years under house arrest. They tried to get a plea negotiation to say that even though she was 70 and he was 84, she was a victim of domestic violence. And for some reason, we think it doesn't happen to seniors. I had 6 hours of interview recordings with her that I was able to get permission from her defense attorney to use, because in April of 2024, on the eve of going to court and being sentenced to 12 years at the age of 76, she was going to get 12 years in prison for the killing of her husband because nobody would believe that she killed him in self-defense because she stored the body in a panic down in her basement. She drank antifreeze and killed herself rather than go spend the rest of her short life, in prison. Because essentially that was a death sentence to give a 76-year-old lady 12 years. So one of the things I always like to think about, when I'm covering crime is not just the serial killers and the mass murderers and all that, but the everyday crime, domestic homicides. They trouble me tremendously because they don't get enough attention, and we study crime with an eye towards prevention. We're not doing this for entertainment value. I want to learn the why behind the crime so that we can prevent it.
So how do we protect ourselves? Like if you are a teenage girl and you are getting texts from someone, you think that it is a friend of yours and it's not a friend, what would you do?
Where to start on this? All right, first of all, the law needs to catch up with technology. It's just not caught up. The amount of cyberbullying and cyber stalking that goes on is horrifying. And now, AI can be a great tool. I actually think it's just the worst thing that's ever happened to humankind because it is just shutting down communication and relationships and original thought. That's just me. I'm an old dog that doesn't like new tricks. But the first thing I would do, honestly, if I were a parent, is complete tech detox. Kids don't need screens. They really don't. They really do need to go outside and touch grass. And I get this all the time because I think the number one thing is we've got to get phones out of kids' hands, and they shouldn't have them in schools at the very least. I understand parents want their kids to have a phone for safety and security reasons. All right, get them one of those jitterbugs, okay? Get them a flip phone. These smartphones are their undoing. And in a nutshell, there's so many studies out there about how they change young brains, how screen addiction changes kids from the time they're 2 and 3 years old. Yes, they're so clever with the phone and with the computer, and yet they have no private lives. They have access to horrible things. Pornography is the least of it. Stuff that adults shouldn't even see, children can see as soon as they get their smartphone. So if I were the parent of a teenager or a child of any sort, the first thing I would do is not let them have a phone until they were 16. At that point, absolutely give them one of those flip phones, those jitterbugs that is not a smartphone. The number one reason that parents get mad at me and go, nope, 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 I want my kid to have a phone in school. I go, why? What good is it? They can use the school's computers. If they need to call you, they can go to the office and have the receptionist call mom, like we did back in the day. They're like, I want my kid to have their phone on them so that when the mass murder happens in their school, they can call me.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. The
That's
presumption
crazy.
that there will be a mass murder in the school,
Yeah.
that we just now accept that as an occupational hazard of sending our kids
To
off every
school,
day
yes.
is truly disturbing.
Crazy.
So I think we need a whole reset on what's important in our
It's not
lives
normal.
and yeah, and reset on what you think is normal and, look at your screen time every day.
Yeah.
Probably subscribe to paper newspapers because I love and and right? And get a landline and get a camera that just works on a digital, on a card instead of a smartphone taking all your pictures. Because I'm gonna tell you that 20 years ago, before tech was a runaway train, our quality of life was actually better. It may not have been as convenient, but the actual quality of family relationships, marriages, parental kid relationships, work relationships, going to work and saying hi to everybody when you got a cup of coffee instead of staring at your phone as you walk by all of your
Yeah.
colleagues. I mean, it's just a whole different world now. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like it.
Yeah, no, it is very problematic when you can't have a conversation with people. As we start to wrap up, is there anything that we should discuss that I haven't brought up? Any things that you want to talk about your podcast that's coming up?
Yeah, okay. And so glad you asked me that because we just, it's funny. You and I started our podcast at almost exactly the same time. We dropped our first episode, I think, November 3rd. So we have been out for exactly 3 months now. Yep. And we just finished shooting. I do a different way. I shoot like 6 or 7 episodes in a studio all at once, and then I
Yeah.
release them slowly and edit them. And we just did the Wade Wilson episode that just dropped a week ago. And good Lord, Carl, I put a little snippet of that on TikTok and got over 5 million clicks. People are fascinated with Wade Wilson. If you don't know who he is, you got to check out my Criminal Appeal podcast. But this was kind of done in partnership with the documentary on Wade Wilson that just dropped on Paramount Plus, and it was excellent. I see lots of true crime documentaries, but this one is just so well done. It's not just about the killer, it's about the people who worship him, the Wade's wives.
Yeah.
Hybristophilia, the obsession these women have with these bad boy killers, serial killers, horrible killers, is something that I study and will never understand. So you can always backtrack and watch the Wade Wilson episode. But coming out in 2 weeks is an episode on the murder of Marianne Measles. And you've never heard of her, but you should have. This is a 13-year-old child who was murdered in my hometown of New Milford, Connecticut, 28 years ago. And I worked that case by literally putting my hiking boots on and going out into the parks and beating the bushes and going around in the lake with my boat looking to see if I could find her. And when I say her, sadly, I just assumed she was dead and was looking for her body and worked with the police on solving that. It would not be solved for 5 years, Carl, and it turned out to be 8 local kids who kept that secret for 5 years, and 2 of them I knew from working at the high school. So that's a
Wow.
case very personal to me. Marianne Measles is coming up, and we do a wonderful collaboration on that one with the podcasters Women and Crime. Criminologists who teach at Fairleigh Dickinson partnered with us on that. And that's so good when podcasters collaborate. So then I've got a few more coming out. We're going to talk about the Brown MIT shootings from December. We are going to talk about Luigi. Yes. What else are we going to do? We're going to talk about Long Island serial killer, which is a case that you and I
Yeah.
covered 15 years ago. You had me on all the time covering the breaking news on Long Island serial killer. Now we know that he's Rex Heuermann, and he's going to come up on trial, we think, this year. And ready for this? Crystal Mangum. Does that name sound familiar?
It does not.
Duke lacrosse accuser.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Yes. You see.
Crystal Mangum
Yeah.
this is in March, makes the 20-year anniversary of the Duke lacrosse scandal, where a young woman accused the Duke lacrosse players, of course, of raping her at a party. I interviewed Crystal Mangum in 2012 for Wives with Knives, which I hosted on ID for 5 years, as you know. And she was actually in prison, follow me here, for something completely unrelated to the Duke lacrosse scandal. She had actually killed her boyfriend and was in prison for that. She had stabbed him to death, so I interviewed her in North Carolina for Wives with Knives. Now, fast forward to January of this year, just a few weeks ago, I read that first of all, in December a year ago, she did an interview with a podcaster and actually apologized and said she lied. This was the first time she ever was
Wow.
on the record of admitting. She doesn't use the word lie. She says she told untruths or gave false evidence is the way
Yeah.
she phrased it. So I followed up with Crystal. She remembered me interviewing her. I called her and had a few prison phone calls with her and talked to her about getting out. She will be out February 27th in just a few weeks. And I wanted to know where her life stands now, what her future plans are. And those jailhouse interviews will also be featured on Criminal Appeal in the upcoming episodes that we're going to break out in the next few weeks.
Wow, that's so
So much on the menu, Carl.
There is a lot. It's very exciting. So,
Yep.
Dr. Casey Jordan, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you also for listening. As always, put your comments below. And until next time, be safe, everybody.